Ian McLeod, is that him there? I don't know. But it can't be, he has to be approved by the council as a whole.
So before the Planning and Zoning Commission officially commence, I'd like to welcome all of you and congratulations on your reappointments to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I will be swearing in Commissioner Waddy, Commissioner Jennings, and Commissioner Donaldson. Commissioner Kent would have to schedule separately because you have to wait till council ratify your appointment at the next council meeting at January 22nd. So you can have a seat.
Oh, really? Okay.
So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. And I put the language up there in case if you need it. I, and please state your name,
I, Doug Donaldson,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your volunteer effort, too.
Okay.
Here you go.
We're all set?
Is
Okay.
that it?
All right.
I'd like to call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on Wednesday, January 9, 2019 to order. Please rise, pledge allegiance to the flag. And could you do roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Donaldson,
Here?
Commissioner Jennings. Here. Commissioner Waddy. Here. Chair Kent.
Here. Any ex parte communications regarding today's agenda? Nope. Consent calendar. We have just two items on the consent calendar. So the consent calendar items considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There will be no separate discussions on these items unless a member of the commission or a member of the audience requests removal of these items from the consent calendar. Does anyone have any comments or requests for removal from the commission? Anyone from the audience request anything to be pulled off the consent item list? Anyone like to put a motion to approve them?
I can move to approve the consent calendar, but maybe I shouldn't, because I feel like I should abstain from the meeting minutes just because I wasn't at the meeting.
Fair enough.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
How
that's
we
probably a
administer that.
good idea. I'll move to approve the consent calendar then.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. And
So that-
Commissioner Jennings will abstain on the minutes then, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that clarification.
Okay.
So that means that planning application 18087, design review for single-story addition 963 Neilson has been approved. You still need to keep the story poles up for another couple weeks because it can be appealed to the city council, but it has been approved.
There aren't any story poles.
Oh, there aren't any?
No,
Oh,
it's
okay.
a single story.
story, yeah.
It's a single level,
That's
single
right,
story.
expansion,
Yeah.
So I just flew in from Australia yesterday, so I didn't have a.
Nice project, nice project.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Good luck moving forward, yeah.
All right. Public comment.
That's it.
So is there anyone from the public that wish to make a comment on an issue or an item that's not on the agenda? Anything on the agenda will have its own separate public comment period. Any cards? No? Sure, please come to the podium. But nobody can hear.
Oh, no, you'll be on
Can't hear
TV,
you
you'll be on
online,
television.
as loud as you think you are. We can hear you, but. Yes, that's on television. You might not have been expecting that, but yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to say hi, that it's much more fun to be here instead of watching TV.
Okay, well,
My name is Juanita Reinerson, and I'm looking forward to this construction that the owner has made a good effort to contact neighbors, and I know the architects. I used to work with his wife.
okay, well, thank you for the positive comment on what we just approved, so, great. Moving on to item 6, discussion of possible action matters related to the following. So the first is a 6.1 study session of planning application 18090, design review and conditional use permit for a new mixed-use residential building at 904 Masonic Avenue. Could Christopher introduce the
Yes,
project?
I'll do a pretty thorough presentation. We have a bit of an interesting project that we don't get very commonly here in Albany. Once again, this is a study session, so no action will be taken on this item right here. And again, this is planning application 18-090, design review and conditional use permit for new residential mixed-use building at 904 Masonic. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 3,751 square foot lot with an existing 980 square foot single-story structure, originally designed and built to be a single-family home in 1924. The building was used as a chiropractor's office from 1985 to present. The subject parcel is zoned Solano Commercial with the neighboring parcel to the south zoned R1. Project request. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing building on site and to build a new 3-story residential mixed-use building. The applicant is therefore seeking design review approval from the commission for the new mixed-use building and a conditional use permit to allow a stairwell projection to exceed the maximum height limit and a reduction in the number of required off-street parking spaces. Here's the street view of the property as it looks today. And here's the proposed elevation of the new mixed-use building with commercial ground floor and residential units above. And here is a 3D render of the front corner of the building. And then here's another render of the side of the proposed building. And then one of the rear corner. You note the off-street parking at the rear. The building programming for this new mixed-use building is as follows. Ground level commercial tenant space with 1,390 square foot tenant space with a single ADA all-gender restroom, entry lobby, stairwell to the dwelling units, and off-street vehicle parking and bicycle parking at the rear, as well as trash receptacle storage. At the second level, the 2 residential units are proposed. They're proposed to mirror each other and will be 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and be a total of 752 square feet with a private balcony for each. And the third level will mirror the second level as well with 2 residential units, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, also 752 square feet with private balcony. And then lastly, the rooftop level is proposed to be to accommodate an open rooftop deck with planters, outdoor furniture, and will be accessible to all residential units, tenants. This brings into consideration the requirement for usable open space. The zoning code requires that multifamily dwellings of 3 units or more provide 200 square feet of common usable open space per unit. Required common open space can be reduced by providing private open space for each unit. The applicant is proposing to common open space in the form of a rooftop deck. Each dwelling unit is also proposed to provide private open balconies, resulting in a reduction of the amount of required area for the said rooftop deck. And then here's just a partial rooftop plan showing the common space in the center with the green arrow, and then the orange arrow indicating the private balconies. Each of the balconies will be exactly the same for each unit. Conditional use permit for stairwell projection. To access the proposed rooftop deck, there is proposed to be a stairwell projection, which will technically exceed the maximum height of 35 feet by 4 feet 5 inches. A conditional use permit is required to allow such projection to exceed the height limit. And then the blue arrow just kind of shows the stairwell projection, and the red line indicates the maximum height limit. Height limits and exceptions to stairwell projection. Per section 20-24.080B, the stairwell projection may exceed the height limit by no more than 10 feet, subject to a use permit and design review by the commission. And then the code excerpt is provided there for reference. Parking. So parking gets a little dense, but I'll try to make it as clear as possible. We'll discuss the required parking. Essentially, the residential and the commercial components of the building dictate two different types of parking requirements. For the residential component of the project, one vehicle space per unit, and in addition to one bicycle space per unit, is required, resulting in a total of 4 vehicle off-street parking spaces and 4 bicycle parking spaces. The commercial component of the project does not require off-street vehicle parking per section 20.28.040B2, and the commercial component does, however, require 1 exterior bicycle rack. And then here's that code section detailing that, which says that ground floor retail area, in the case of new construction, enlargement, or increase of capacity or change of use involving ground floor space for retail uses in the Solano commercial districts, the calculation of off-street parking requirement shall include a reduction of the gross building floor area by up to 1,500 square feet on the ground floor retail area. In other words, the first 1,500 square feet of the ground floor retail is exempt from providing off-street vehicle parking. And the parking that's proposed for this specific project, the applicant is proposing 3 off-street vehicle parking spaces unbundled for the residential component, and 3 bicycle parking spaces. So a total of 3 vehicle and 3 bike parking spaces for the residential tenants. For the commercial component, no vehicle off-street parking space is proposed because it's not required, and no bicycle rack has been indicated on the plan set. And then, not to beat a dead horse, but this is just the table that was included in the staff report, kind of summarizing the amount of required parking, strictly speaking, per the zoning code, and what is being proposed before you tonight. The applicant is also seeking a conditional use permit to waive one of the off-street vehicular parking spaces for the proposed project. And the section 20.28.040A5 of the zoning code for residential mixed-use development, the Planning and Zoning Commission may, by conditional use permit, reduce the on-site parking requirements contained in subsection 20.28.030A. In reducing on-street parking requirements, the commission shall consider an on-site car share service, unbundled parking, which the applicant is proposing, a private bicycle share program, transportation demand management plan, or a combination thereof. Staff has received 1 correspondence with concern over unprotected bicycle parking. This correspondence was forwarded to the commission today. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA. And recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review the proposed plans and provide feedback to the applicant and staff. This is a study session, once again, and no action will be taken. In addition to general feedback, staff requests specific feedback on the proposed parking, as well as the stairwell projection on the rooftop. And with that, I can answer any questions you guys have.
I know it's just a study session, so, well, I think we don't have a comment to
No
staff?
questions.
Questions, staff?
Just a couple of quick questions. So is, in the SC district, is ground floor commercial required?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you just tell us a little about what the covered bike parking requirements are?
So-
Like, is there detail about what that means and where it needs to be located?
Yeah, the code dictates protected, one off-street bicycle parking space per dwelling unit that is protected. I don't believe much detail, I don't believe protected parking for the bicycles was shown on the plans, but I don't think the applicant would have trouble accommodating.
Okay. I guess I was just curious, like, what does protected actually mean in our code?
Covered and secure.
Covered and secured, okay. And then, I think I had one other question. Oh, I was just curious about how the unbundled parking is implemented in Albany. Like, do they have to enter some kind of agreement to, lease the spaces separately, or how does that work?
So this will be the first time we
Oh,
have an
okay.
unbundled project, so.
Okay, right, because we
Never been
just
done.
changed the code, like, in the last year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How are you planning to implement it?
Well, I'm glad you raised the question because this gives us actually something to think about in terms of how we would structure that as part of the project approval, whether that's through conditions of approval and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
As far as the open space requirements for each unit were totaled, and that came up to the space for the roof, right?
That's correct.
It doesn't seem like a huge space, but do you know what the requirement is for 2 exits for a trap space like that? Does it exceed the square footage?
If you could help me understand the two
Well, if it's,
exits on the.
if
on
it
the
required open
roof.
space on the roof and it's community, so it could be a lot of people up there potentially if everybody had a Saturday evening event or something.
I think the project architect is
Yeah.
eager to.
Maybe we can switch over. Could you come up? No, come on up. We'll start asking you questions. I think it's time.
So my name's Richard Tapp. I'm the project architect. And what we did is, as far as the ADA and also fire and also structure and exiting, we met with the fire department. We also met with the building consultant, the plan check consultant. They reviewed the plans, and the roof deck has less than 10 occupants. It is not considered it's not considered a 4th story, so therefore a single exit is okay.
Okay, thank you. And another question was the third parking stall, is that to code? Because there's no place for it to back into to go forward again.
Yeah, correct. It's a compact space, and so we are tight in that. But so it'll be actually a 3-point turn for them to get out. It's unusual because we've only got 4 units, and we have to comply with ADA parking. So the first space has to be a van space, which is very large, and then we also have the loading zone area next to it. So so we've actually got. And that has to be obviously a standard space. And then we have 2 compacts next to it. And the compacts will be able to back out, but it'll be a 3-point turn rather than rather than a full single turn.
Right, okay. Well, it fits the code to do that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay. Anyone want
Yeah,
comments?
I had a couple of other questions for either the architect or staff. On the stair penthouse, given that it's a 3-unit building, are there any other alternative ways of accessing the roof deck, such as like a sliding hatch or things of that nature, or is a actual sort of structured stair penthouse the required mechanism for getting up to the roof?
Well, because we've got the roof deck, we have to have a stair, a compliant stair, going to the roof. And since we have the compliant stair, that provides access for maintenance, access for the for the occupants, to enjoy the roof deck, and then also exiting and egress for, if there's any emergency up there, and obviously fireman access as well.
So
No,
you'd
we
be
don't-
prohibited from doing like one of those sliding roof hatches for access at a
yes,
3-unit
yeah.
level?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
What do you mean by a sliding roof hatch?
I know in San Francisco, at least especially for a lot of 1- and 2-family homes, and I think that's the distinction is going to an apartment building code occupancy, but they do sort of flat sliding, kind of a sliding at the deck level so that there's not a volume of a stair penthouse. To sort of minimize the volume and the height and bulk, you can have sort of a retractable sliding hatch. It almost looks like a skylight that's like retractable for access.
Okay.
So I was just wondering if that was an option here, since we're looking for, this is a conditional use, to see if there are other options that
Right.
could be availed to still have the access on the roof. But it sounds like this is the only
Well,
type of structure that
Sounds
can
like
accommodate.
it sounds like that's not probably an option.
No, it isn't. And what we did, we're cognizant of the, aware of the neighbour to the south, and there is a setback, there is the setback requirement, so we're 10 foot there. We've located the road on the same side, so that pushes the building away from the neighbour. And then the setback is 5 feet, so we're 10 foot away. The balconies, and then what we do, we've got some pop-outs for the bathrooms that are a couple of feet, and they cantilever over a little garden area below. And then with the zoning requirements, because we are siding onto residential, we have a 20-foot vertical at the 5-foot setback, 28 foot, and then we have a 45 degree up to the 35. So it basically sets it back so you don't impose too much of a structure on the. And we are also we're on the north side of the residential, so we're not blocking sun and from them as well. Mm-hmm. And then on the north side is commercial, full commercial on Solano Avenue. And then on the west side, there's a large three-story apartment building.
I did have one other question, maybe for staff. So is this building right now sort of the maximum height that's permitted for a 3-story building or in general?
Yes, it's at the maximum height proposed.
So if there was a desire to have the ground floor be a little taller, it would have to be at the sacrifice of shorter floor-to-ceiling heights for the upper 2 floors?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. And if I could bring your attention to the front elevation, is that okay? Christopher?
I got it right up there.
So what we're looking at, you can see the red line, so that's actually the maximum height. You can see the setback on the left at 45 degree.
Yeah.
And the bulk of the building from the street level is here.
Yeah.
But we're probably 4 to 5 feet below the maximum. And then this structure here is well back, halfway back on the building, so you won't see that from the street. And then the other thing we did do is we looked at the stair, we flipped the stairs so that the stair comes up, and instead of doing a square box, we angled the roof.
So the shade trellises, what they're called, shade trellis, yeah.
Yes.
Those are over the second and third floor, right? Those
Correct.
white, okay.
Yeah.
I may have some similar comments. I think I'm going to wait till the study session and then, till see if there's public comment, and then, I don't know.
Well-
It's hard for me to weigh whether I'm questioning staff and the architect or whether I'm doing.
Well, I can sit down and.
But that's fine, yeah.
Well, hold on. And I don't know if you wanted to give, more of a presentation or if you're happy just to answer questions, but I did want to talk a little bit about the recommendations that staff had in the staff report
Right.
in terms of, potentially taking up more of the roof area for the common open space
Right.
to meet the minimum code requirements. And I did want to talk about the covered bike parking. So if you could
I
just,
can
if you can
address those two
address
areas.
those and let us know
Yeah.
what you're thinking.
Correct. Okay, so as far as the roof, as far as the open space, we are actually compliant. The dimensions on the drawings that Christopher used were the interior dimensions to the interior of the railings, and so what we've got is. I've sent him a supplement clarifying that, so we meet that. We meet the open space requirement exactly, and there's plenty of space to work that as well. If there's an increase needed, we can do it. But at the moment, we're about 30 feet, I think about 30, we're 35 feet more than the required based on the computer calculations, the CAD calculations.
Okay. And sorry, just a sec. Does staff agree with that calculation, or have you had a chance?
Yeah,
to...
I wasn't too worried at the time because the way I derived the numbers were based on the dimensions that were provided, whereas I believe Richard's dimensions from CAD are probably more precise and more accurate than what I was able to derive just from
whatever
physical
happens,
plans.
we'll make it work, and we'll make sure
Yeah,
that
so I'm not too
they're
worried.
confident with it.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
And then as far as the bike parking, if we could go maybe to the side elevation? Yeah, well, okay, that's
Rear.
Is that okay?
So what we've got, so there's the building overhangs at the back here, and so we've actually got this is an exit from the commercial area, and then we've got a deck here with stairs going down. Then we have this area here for trash recycling, and then we also have 3 spaces. You can just see the bike here. The tree is blocking it. And so we've got 3 spaces there. They are covered by the overhang. And if you looked at the side elevation, you'd be able to see. So there's the bike parking here. So it is actually covered, it's protected. And the protection means covered from the rain, basically. So we've got 3 spaces there. We may be able to get a 4th. It really depends on the requirements for the trash and the recycling. And then at the front, we're looking at we can get an uncovered bicycle parking spot here at the front as well. The other thing we were going to do is talk to Public Works, the sidewalk folks, and look and see if we could have one of the symbolic bicycle stands for locking up their bikes on the sidewalk. And we are adding a street tree. So I think
secure bike parking is only means covered from the, I thought it meant it was locked up, so.
So within the code, bicycle storage protected is defined as individually enclosed in secure space for a bicycle. This includes bicycle lockers, electronic lockers, and interior bicycle parking.
So it means a little bit more than.
then we can make that work. I don't know if it is individual or if it's group, but for the next session, I can go talk to the garbage folks and get that figured out.
Maybe just a cage or something so that.
Okay, right. So no, we can get that worked out. We've got enough room to do. What was there what was it? Multi-level?
Yeah, you could do multi.
Yeah, we could easily do multi-level.
You can do multi-level bike parking, you can hang bikes.
Yeah, we can easily do
I think you
that.
have room to work with, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we've got at that space we've got about 12 feet.
Funny, okay. Some of the other practical concerns I was worried about was obviously you've covered the issue of venting for your bathroom and kitchen sinks through because I think they're underneath the roof deck.
Right.
So when you're not going to vent through the roof.
No, we'll be able to do horizontal. We've got enough ceiling height and within the roof deck to get them out to the side.
Okay. And this design is, everything's loose and movable, right? Nothing's bolted down or tied down.
Oh, as far as the roof deck?
Yeah, as far as the roof deck.
At the present time, we decided not to do built-in planters, to do more in individual pots and planters, and that's more from also a maintenance and a leakage point of view. And then the tables and chairs can be moved, they can be moved around. But on the other hand, we were also looking at maybe building in a couple of bench seats as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's any wind requirements at that height. But
Umbrellas might be
yeah, it did look like
issue.
it could be a problem if
Yeah.
it flew off. I know there was something flying off the roof there could be problematic for a lot of things. And also the livability of the space. I know it's more of a diagram than space, but if it is meant to be the group common space, it kind of a yawn right now. It's just a few things thrown out on a deck to satisfy a requirement rather than someplace you really want to enjoy. So I just pushing, I don't know, I think building something in there to make it a little bit.
Right.
Use the space to build community rather than just to satisfy code.
Right. I mean, we've got a rooftop visual too, which is actually quite attractive, and I can bring that to the next one. But with the furniture being flexible, people can move it around.
Yeah, I don't think mixed flexible furniture is a bad thing. It could be fine, yeah.
So because it's multiple for 4 families. So if they've got a couple.
But it looks like it's satisfying 2 people just sitting there reading the paper. And then you have the table, which could be nice, I guess, but and you're probably not expecting, this probably isn't much in the way of families here, but you might have kids. And dogs you don't have to deal with because you can walk them on the street easily enough. So maybe that's all you really do have to worry about is.
Right.
So maybe it's thought through. But that's a kitchen grill, right? Is that propane?
Correct. We'd put a
Not hard
grill
line.
there.
So it's hard-lined or propane gas?
No, propane.
Propane.
Because they'll roll it around, and in the wintertime, they'll roll it, and, they'll roll it up against the stair area.
So a little prep table, that might go with it, things that
Right.
just make it more. This is a design discussion session, so I'm just throwing those ideas out there. Okay. Any other comments from folks?
At the moment.
So I'm going to continue then. So the landscape, as far as the rest of the landscape too, it's very just a diagram placeholder.
Let's open the public hearing and then bring it
You're
back for comments. I do have other comments, but let's see if there's public as
Yeah,
comments.
I tend to skip over public. Anyone in the public like to make a comment on this project?
Guess everyone left.
And they were for the other project, I believe, yeah. Okay, closing public, we do have please come forward. Could you speak at the podium?
Good evening.
And introduce yourself, please.
My name is Curtis Evans, better known in the business industry as Mr. C. I have no objections at all, but I have one concern about the parking. We both talk about the red parking. I mean, we've been robbed of all the parking on the corner of Masonic and Solano. The red stripe has just robbed us all, and my new business is going to be opening up in about a couple of weeks anyway. And I was just talking to Mr. Abram here about we got to do something about that red stripe there, because that red stripe is the reason that Mr. Abram was able to buy the building that he had, because the doctor was robbed of parking and dealing with handicapped people. She could no longer keep the building, and that's why she vacated. And so we don't want to create a big problem going forward when we can get that red curb erased.
So that could.
Because there's a tremendous amount of
It runs from,
bike lanes underneath the BART park.
Solano, all
it
of
runs
it.
from this site up to the corner.
And how many feet is that?
All of the front. It's pretty long. It's really pretty long. And then it's red across the street as well. On the other side of Masonic is red there too.
We've even had the fire department to come out and look at it also, and we talked about that too. So
And
they felt that out.
what's the reason? To give your,
they was complying with the, with the amount of lanes and space for the bike riders, but as well as the sharing the path for the bikers. We got to keep in mind of the business owners there as well.
yeah.
Because my neighbor next door, Dr. N, she was robbed and she had to just vacate. I was able to stand because part of my building is on Solano Avenue. But as far as my Masonic part, it has almost killed the business, but I want it to be, as that business begin to go forward, I would like to see some of that red moved.
We should definitely look at it and make sure that
That's
it's
my
not in
only
excess, right?
objection. But
So
I think he has a beautiful project that he's building.
And where are you opening up your new business?
Pardon me?
Where are you opening your new
My
business?
business is on the corner of Solano and Masonic. It's soon to be the Cajun Cafe.
C's.
But it's been
Yeah,
Mr.
but I
C's
thought
for
you-
30-plus years.
I know, but I thought it closed and you're.
Yeah, we've gone through a tremendous renovation, and we've been cleared the way, we got a new license and everything, and
I haven't been by there recently. All right.
and I don't see any problem with my new neighbor coming in. I explained to him that we're going to have a grill out between the building and his property line. We will be grilling outside because we've been given the permit to do so. We have a concrete landing there. But I have no objection to Mr. Abram. I think it's a beautiful project there.
Signs in the window, right? Your Valentine's Day dinner at your
yes.
place, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I saw that. I
So
saw that.
while as everybody knowing about it, we got a great jazz individual that's going to be playing there on that day. You'll see his picture in the winter sometime this week. It's going to be a great thing for the neighborhood here as well. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then I'll close public comment
Okay.
and bring it back to the podium. Doug, would you like to start off?
I guess I could. I guess I could start. Okay. Let's see. So we're doing a study session here. I just want to say, initially, I'm very impressed with the project. I guess I wish the site were bigger and you could do a bigger building in many respects. It's, there's a lot to like about the design. I do not have any problem with the height limit. I don't have any problem approving the conditional use permit for the staircase up above. I noticed that you do respect the 45-degree daylight plane and that the staircase is designed appropriately and is well back from the street. I don't have any concerns about that. I really like the project. I think it looks great, and I could probably vote for it now. We are doing a study session here, and I do have a few questions and comments and maybe some issues that maybe the commission should discuss as well. You say that, part of it is parking. I may have some concerns about the parking waiver that's required. You say that a disabled space or handicap space is required. If that goes in, and if that really is required, it seems to me that effectively that only leaves 2 spaces for the building, unless somehow one of those units is earmarked exclusively for someone who has a disabled person's permit. Otherwise that disabled space will just sit there unused until some of your tenants or when they have a handicap sticker will use that space. I think that's just not going to get used at all. So effectively, I'm worried that you're looking at only 2 spaces really for 4 units. And then I look at that and I realize that the front of your building has been set back 8 or 10 feet from the property line, maybe 7 feet. I'm not sure how far. 7.5 feet. So it occurred to me, why? Why wouldn't it come up to the 0 setback line or closer? You have your balconies, which I like actually on the front. And I'm wondering if some compromise couldn't be made. I think you should take a look at the idea of moving the entire building forward a little bit, perhaps gaining another parking space in the back, compact space like you have with a difficult maneuvering room, but still a space, and maybe keeping the balconies and asking the city if we can give you an encroachment permit for the air rights so that those balconies might actually encroach out over the public right of way a little bit. Or potentially you could eliminate the balconies and you could have their open space for those units up on the roof, because I think there's room to gain those extra 60 square feet of space if you eliminated those. So there's a whole thing there that I'm worried about. I'm not going to I don't want to automatically waive the parking. I think we're making a mistake on that if we did that. The unbundled parking is new to us, and what I see potentially happening here is that it was enough parking available on Masonic, which is a single-loaded street with homes and has quite a bit of curb space on the other side of Masonic. Most of it is used by Albany by employees working on businesses on Solano. I think that's where employee parking occurs a lot because it's not 90-minute restricted. And it's moderately parked up, but there's always a few spots there. So I think what would happen if you had unbundled parking here is that none of the occupants of the building would pay you the $100 a month or $30 a month, whatever it's going to cost to park their cars in the back. And they're going to say, oh, no, thank you, and I'll park on the street. And then we will have effectively no practical off-street parking here, and that worries me. I'm just worried about that dynamic. So I would be inclined to not go in favor of bundled parking here and require that the parking that is available in the rear of the building be dedicated, be bundled with the units that are there. If we only have 3 spaces back there, then only 3 of the units would come with parking. But I think that, I think practically speaking, from my point of view, we should do that. I would hate to see those parking spaces just remain vacant because they cost too much. It would bother me. Another thought I had about the commercial space is that I think that having it closer to the sidewalk, closer to the line of Mr. C's buildings next door, closer to the commercial storefronts that are there, might help the usability of your commercial space. Another question I had for you is potentially that commercial space could be a restaurant. Restaurants are in high demand. And are you going to build it initially with the proper infrastructure, the venting equipment, or the space to install kitchen equipment in there if you had a restaurant tenant? And or not, or will it just be an ordinary retail space? I think that you should be able. I think the commission should know that ahead of time. I'm curious about that, and I don't know what happens if it is going to be a restaurant. I guess we deal with that later. But then there's a parking requirement for restaurants that's higher. Have we changed that now?
In this case, because we're looking at it as new construction, it effectively eliminates any off-street parking requirements. So that, as an example, the building at 1137 Solano, where Hopsy is, that was approved similar to this in that there was no parking requirement. It was also sort of pre-configured for a restaurant, as a restaurant shell, with the intention that a future tenant would do the necessary improvements to make it a functional space.
And it hasn't been used that way. It's been used for.
It's been used for retail.
But okay, but that's cool. So anyway, So I think that'd be a good idea to keep the options open then that way. Okay. Let me think about that. And yes, I did talk to Mr. C I ran into Mr. C when I was over there doing my field work, and we did talk about those red spaces in the street, and they do look excessive to me, but I understand what happened. I think when the Sharrows were put in on Masonic, and when Masonic was restriped a couple of years ago, and they put a right turn lane there on Solano, on Masonic northbound, then that added some red, apparently on both sides of the street. But the one on this side is really a long red space, and I bet you could get 2 more or 3 more street spaces out of that. I think that traffic and safety of the city should. Public Works, whoever's appropriate, Jeff, should take a look at that.
Yeah, I don't know all the history behind that red curb, but I think it is related to some bike improvements that were put in.
Yeah, the Sharrows were put in there.
We can include that analysis as part of the next staff report going forward.
All right. What else do I have? And yes, I noticed the letter we had from Amy, and I agree with a lot of the comments. I think this is a great site for bicycling, and that your tenants, the occupants of the building, will be using bicycles and walking a lot, and that a really good, secure, and safe bicycle parking will be an amenity that your customers will really want and appreciate. So I'm all in favor of that. Yeah. What else? Is there anything else I have? That's all I can think of right now. I really like the project. I think it's a great start. Okay.
I know Mr. C looks like he would like to say something.
Mr. C, you want to add something?
Could you please
Sure,
use
would you want
the
to come back
microphone?
up?
Yeah.
One thing I want to reiterate is I'm glad the panel focused in on the sharp turn when you're coming down Solano Avenue. I would like for each of you guys to go down to the corner of Solano and San Pablo and stand there and take the pictures as I did with a guy from Berkeley, and which I wanted to come before and present the case, but I wanted to hold off, and he says I should bring it because we stood there and he took the pictures. On San Pablo, there are tankers coming from San Pablo, making a turn up Solano Avenue, and there's tankers come down Solano and make either left or right on San Pablo, and there are buses with trailers on it that do the same. But they worked it out where when the buses turn, it's about 25 feet from San Pablo, cars begin to park. And my question is, why didn't they do that for my corner? Because we get no tankers turning left or right, nor do we get any buses from the city with double the turn.
I mean, that's a really good question, and we can't, I think it's a really good question. We so much should look at it.
Yeah, I'm quite sure if you guys come down and take a look at what I'm talking about, you would definitely agree. But I didn't want the guy from Berkeley I didn't want to create a lot of discrepancies here. I wanted to keep the peace and get my thing going as smooth as possible when my time comes. But I think the time is coming now, and he's going to be coming. We talked about that red turn there before also. Okay. Because the red, all of that is not really necessary.
You're right. We want to look at any place we can get a parking spot. We want to get it. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Is it possible if I just very quickly address Mr. Donaldson's, some of his questions?
Sure, it's a working section. Working.
Sure.
Let's do it now rather than.
Sure.
So, thank you for liking the project. As far as the unbundled parking, we understand the parking issue. We tried to avoid having an ADA parking space there. And unfortunately, once you go to condominium, once you go to 3 condominiums, you're required to have it. I don't know how it is policed. So it's a parking space way at the back. All I'm just saying is I don't know how that is being policed. However, the 2 that are designated there, they will be dedicated to individual tenants within the building. So they'll have free parking in that space. So they won't, we can't prevent them from parking on the street, but those spaces will be used. We'd encourage them to be used. So that's the first thing. And then as far as the use...
Hold on, can you back up?
Yeah.
So even though they're not bundled, they're still dedicated to the people in the building?
Well, the concern is that if there's additional money if it's unbundled, and if someone has to pay extra to be able to park there, what we would do is we'd designate Adam, the owner, it just said that he'd be able to designate it to a single tenant, so that tenant would then be encouraged to use that space, and they wouldn't want to go out on the street because it's at the rear, it's safer, it's more convenient, and etc. So the idea we want those parking spaces to be used as much as possible.
So it sounds like they're bundled.
Question. Well, I just had a question. Is this a condo project or a rental project?
No, I'm sorry. It's a rental project.
It's going to be a rental?
Yeah, but when I said condo, it's apartments or condos, right?
They're not planning on being individually developed and sold. You are going to own the building and...
They're rentals, okay.
So that's a rental project.
That was an unfortunate slip of the tongue because
thank you.
The limitation relates primarily to condos, but it applies to apartments equally.
Yeah.
Could I ask one more question about the ADA space? I'm unsure, like if there's a person who needs to use an ADA space, it's not totally clear to me whether the units themselves are accessible But I imagine you've looked at the
Right,
accessibility of the
right.
units.
Yeah, we went through that in detail with the city plan checker. And the building does not require an elevator, and we do not require to have any accessible unit. We do have to have one adaptable unit. So one unit on the second floor, which is a little counterintuitive, because the second floor is considered the ground floor for the residential, and that has to be adaptable but not accessible.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to that parking space, I'm curious, and staff or you could address this if you know the answer. I'm curious whether there is an option to create that space to meet ADA requirements, but then in the event that there is no one who has a sticker who needs to use it, have it be available to another tenant, so it's not sitting vacant if it doesn't have to. Is that allowable?
Yes.
Okay.
We are, the city does not enforce the parking on private property. So because it is private, if someone who did not have the handicap placard used that space, it's up to the property owner to police that particular parking scenario. So
Okay.
Right.
So we don't necessarily have to worry about the scenario of a space just
Sitting vacant. Yeah. I
for
think
that
in all
reason.
practical terms, it wouldn't sit vacant, but I can't really say that.
Sure.
Well, if the tenants know that they can park there without, then they wouldn't, but otherwise they might
Right.
resist it.
Right.
And I would want to make sure that it would become available to someone who needed it, of course.
Oh, no, of course, it is not required for commercial, so those three spaces are only for residential. And then as far as the setback goes, there was a tree there, and the owner, Adam, wanted to keep the tree. We went through a lot of design scenarios to try and keep it, and it became, we got an arborist out there, the city arborist was involved, but it became too onerous on the project, and it didn't, to set it back, we'd have to set back 30 feet, we lost the parking, etc. So after about 3 months, Adam gave the go-ahead to, remove the tree. But we did look at the setback, and we think because we're off Solano, it's not really a prime retail space. Right. But we think it could be service, so it could be real estate officers, attorneys, architects, whatever. But there is also the potential that Adam's asked us to provide venting for a future restaurant. And one of the ideas was with the courtyard, at the setback, the 7-foot area at the front, that would be nicely landscaped. It also, what we were looking at is it respected the residential neighbour to the south, rather than just having a commercial right up at the street front, that by setting back, we created, the site plan,
We can pull it up, one moment.
So anyway, Mr. C's property is right at the property line. And then do you have the one with the neighbours? We've got a drawing.
A little image on the top, if you, it's kind of small, but.
Yeah, this one here. Wow. So there should be a plan associated with this, but basically this is at the street front. This one here is set back about 15 feet. Right. And so we're set back 7.5. So I think that's a nice transition. Okay. And the other thing too, I don't think I would like to recommend that we have balconies over the sidewalk. The liability for that, getting Public Works and engineering to approve it is one thing. Having awnings and everything is okay, but having people out there on the balconies potentially, accidentally dropping something on the public is something I don't think I would encourage. So that would be the only concern there.
Could I say something?
I do have comments,
Can I say something I forgot?
Yeah.
You've mentioned it, and Mr. C mentioned it with the word photograph. Here, I have a photograph. It is
The tree.
one of my favorite trees in Albany.
Yeah.
That we're going to lose here, and that's the
beautiful
first thing I saw.
Is that a cedar?
That's a beautiful tree. I love it in
it's
the
a sugar
winter, and I've already mentally said goodbye to it.
We were looking at it's a perfect Christmas tree.
Oh, it's
in the
great.
shape of it.
Gorgeous, yeah.
But it does lose, or it's unusual, it's a pine tree, but it's a sugar pine, and it
Right.
loses all its needles
Yeah.
in the wintertime. So it's just a bare, a bare tree then, which
Yeah.
is very unusual for a pine.
I've loved it for years, so.
It's not a
pass
Don,
it
it's
on.
not a
Just
Don
pass it
Redwood,
on.
I can't.
Pass it on, yeah.
It's a sugar pine, you
Nice.
sure?
It's a sugar pine.
Okay, well, I guess just, you can sit down, but just to share a few additional comments. I guess to talk first about the parking, I mean, well, I'll start by saying I also like the project overall. I think it's, you're really kind of maximizing, you're not literally maxing out every square foot that you could on the site, but I think you're making good, efficient use of it, and happy to see some new, moderately sized units coming into Albany. So I do like it. I think it's an attractive design, and overall, it's a good project. With respect to the parking, I'm not, too concerned about being able to approve a parking reduction, assuming that's, what you come back with. But I do think that it's really important to, to do the max you can with respect to bike parking, and make that attractive. I do like that it's, adjacent to the Albany Greenway, and I don't know if, really serious bike commuters use that, but it's a nice amenity for folks, and it provides really easy access to BART. So yeah, definitely trying to encourage the bike use. And with respect to the unbundled parking, I think this is one of these situations where you can kind of, at least in an ideal world, the market kind of solves that problem. Like, if people aren't using the spaces, then, perhaps the owner of the building reduces the price of the spaces to try to, get more out of it. I don't think our code imposes any specific requirements about, what unbundling means, and there may be some details that we need to think through. Well, unbundling typically means that you
Unbundling
charge
means you charge
separately
for it.
You had mentioned that they.
Unbundling means your parking's not included in your rent.
in your rent.
It's not included in your rent.
Or
You don't
rather
get-
that
You don't
you-
get a space.
Or rather that you, if you don't use the parking space, you get a discount. So it can kind of be
That's what I
framed either
understood, but
way.
that's not the description I heard, so.
Well, and it could
Oh,
be
well,
that, it could
then I
be that
guess
we
we need to
don't all agree
clarify
on what it means, yeah.
unbundling means, but I mean, typically, unbundled means that it's charged separately from the rent, so that you're giving people a reason not to have a car. That's right. Making it, giving them a concession if they don't have a car. So at any rate, I think if the price point is right, people who have cars will see that as as where they want to park their vehicle, rather than, excessively using the street. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but I mean, just in my professional life, I'm working with various apartment owners who like entitled their projects with one space per unit, and nobody's using them. And I think that parking standard, and that I think it's different when you have a bigger project and you just have more data points. But I think the trend we're seeing is for lower parking ratios for residential projects. So overall, I think that under the whole circumstances, the support is there to approve the parking exception if you address the bike situation. And I do agree that it would be nice to see a little bit more on the roof. And you mentioned bringing back plans for how you envision sort of programming that. And would like to see you kind of make the most of that space. But yeah, overall, I think it's a good project. No more comments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Got a few. Similarly, just wanted to echo my compliments on the project. I do think this is a nice project. I think it's definitely a higher and better use of this property, especially the fact that it is still in the Solano zoning district. And it's also nice to see some diversity of unit types. We often don't see new apartments being added to Albany's housing stock, and I think it's nice to sort of bring that mixture into Albany. And as it relates to the reduced parking, in my opinion, at least out of anywhere in Albany, this is the place where you genuinely can reduce it and reasonably expect that people could forego having vehicles and actually get by with their day-to-day life, and even with families get by, especially with the proximity to the schools and BART and Transbay Bus and all of that. So I have a couple comments on sort of the architecture piece. I think overall, I think it's done a great job. I've got a couple points that are more just for consideration for you to explore, not necessarily things that I'm opposed to, but just kind of things that came to my head. But one that I would definitely like to have explored a little bit more is actually on the north facade on the building. None of the renderings show the north facade, but when looking at the elevation, especially given how much taller it is than the corner building and the proximity to Solano and the fact that that block of Solano definitely has some gaps in the street wall as well, it's definitely going to be very visible, especially coming eastbound up Solano towards Masonic. And so I would ask you to really explore, I think on the south side, you've done a really nice job of articulating and breaking up the facade. I know here, obviously, operable windows are more challenging on the property line, but to figure out some way to bring a little articulation and breaking up that sort of stark white wall that otherwise people are going to be looking at. So that's one that I definitely would like to see in the final design. The other two that are more just for consideration is on the front facade, at the commercial level. Although I really like how at the upper level, sort of the arched feature is a nice way to break up the front facade. I feel like at the ground floor level, it almost makes it feel like you have two different commercial spaces there. It kind of breaks that commercial space. Was sort of that solid element. And again, it's not something that I'm hard and fast on, but I was kind of going back and forth on that of would it be better if we had this sort of break that differentiated the ground floor commercial space from the residential above and had a more uniform sort of storefront glazing. So anyhow, just something for you to kind of percolate on and think through. And then the other piece was at the upper residential levels. I feel like we're missing like a little bit of glazing that could maybe be introduced where right now the hardy board is on sort of the left side there. I don't know if it's just maybe the windows could be a little bit wider or something like that, but it felt just like it could use a little something else on the front facade.
No, you're right. Okay, could you go to the 3D corner?
And I do see how sort of reading it from the corner coming northbound, you kind of read that corner as an element, and I think that's a really nice feature. But coming at it southbound or looking straight on, it felt like there was just a marginal amount of, thank you. Yeah, no, this is a lovely perspective. But again, looking at it from other perspectives, just something for you to think on the proportions there a little bit. And then in the final plan set, I think on especially on a building like this with the windows, the devil's really in the detail and the execution of the quality of the windows, you know, the thickness and the depth of the mullions, those types of details. They can either be done exquisite on a building like this and look really great, or they can look really cheap. And so I think it would be really helpful to have those types of details provided in our final plan when we're approving this, just so that we can make sure that those details, along with the details of the railing and all of that, all those kind of architectural details are specified and really thought through. But overall, I think the composition, I actually think the south facade is really nice. I think you've done a nice job playing with depths of the different materials, and the window pattern isn't sort of, it's not too like, symmetrical, but there's enough balance. You've kind of struck, I think, a nice balance between all those different elements. Just a couple other minor things. On the driveway and in the rear yard, again, not something that I'm hard and fast on, but worth exploring to see whether you can introduce some sort of permeable paver. I think traditionally in Albany, we tend to see permeable rear yards. The fact that this is where the parking is going and you have to access down the long driveway on the side, it's really introducing a lot of concrete here that kind of sort of unsoftens, if you will, sort of the more sort of our traditional yards. So to look at a way that you might be able to bring in a permeable paver system, I think would enhance the project. And then going to the other second question that staff asked of us, at least as it relates to the height bonus for the stair penthouse, again, after hearing sort of the justification that there aren't really alternative options for an interior stair to bring access up to the roof other than doing a stair penthouse, and how it's been oriented and sloped to align with the descent of the stair, I'm fine with the extra. I would be supportive of the conditional use for the additional height for the stair penthouse. I guess just a little side note to staff on that. Since there is that allowance in our code for the extra height for the stair penthouse, I feel like it would be worthwhile at the city looking at a similar allowance for an increased height of the ground floor commercial space. Because I do feel like a 9'6", I mean, this is no fault of the projects, this seems to be sort of constraints of the code. But a 9'6" commercial space, especially one that's as deep as this, is a little squat. And I think if there was a way to be able to give, a couple feet, maybe up to 12 feet, or in other parts of Solano, even maybe up to 14 feet, to really have a really gracious ground floor, especially one that could align with sort of more historic heights of ground floors that might be a little bit taller. I think that would enhance sort of commercial viability of a lot of these spaces. But anyhow, neither here nor there for your project purposes, but just sort of food for thought. I think that's it. Overall, again, I think you're really far along on this project, and just a couple little details to look at for the next round.
Thank you.
May I just comment on the north wall? I think it's relevant. We were looking at that. There's a potential of a mural, not necessarily a depictive mural, but a geometric mural there, and as part of the art project. And so we were going to work with staff on that. The railings on the front balconies, we're going to commission an artist to design the metalwork. And then we're also, in the recess area, the courtyard at the front, we're going to have a public bench that will be done by an artist as well. So that will be part of the enhancement. So the other thing too is that if we don't do a mural on the side, which can be a little very subjective. I'm looking at doing some indentation where we can use some 2x6 studs versus 2x4, get a 2-inch relief, and get a shade on shade, so it'll be a cream and a grey to break it up. So that comment's very. We know about it. We just didn't address it, and because of the art issue. But it's a good comment.
So, is there a public art requirement?
Yes. Yeah.
What is the requirement?
So it can be fulfilled in one of two ways. At high level, the fee itself is calculated. It's 1.75% of the construction valuation. So that's provided to the developer at the time that the building permit fees are calculated. They have the option of either paying an in lieu fee, which satisfies the requirement, or they can elect to incorporate the art as part of the project. That goes through actually a two-step process, an initial step with the Arts Committee, who would then make a recommendation to Planning and Zoning to either approve or approve with modification.
Would that, if that were the option that was pursued on this project, would that come concurrent with the approval of the project, or sort of a post-construction
It could go either way. My guess is this probably would come once the building permit has been issued. And then at that point, the applicant may be, have identified an artist that they're willing to work with.
Okay. I guess the only feedback that I would have on that, I think a mural would be great and could sort of solve the same kind of issues I have about sort of the blank wall visibility. But I feel you kind of need to figure out which way you're going, either, showing it as a blank wall of, this will be a mural, so that at least we kind of have a sense for a condition of approval that this will be a mural, or come forward with sort of an architectural change so that we kind of know what we're approving going into it, rather than it just, crossing our fingers if,
My understanding is it's a commitment, and we have to fulfill it, and we have to go through staff and the art commission. So it's guaranteed that we've done. It's nebulous at the moment. We don't know.
Right. So when you come back for approval, so long as you lock in, we are doing art, or we are doing the architectural changes. Choose one or the other by the time we come back for the approvals.
The only thing with doing the mural is if Mr. C
Builds up.
a 3-story building next to us, the expensive mural is gone.
Yeah.
That's all, yeah.
My recollection is on Belmont Villages, we did the art later after the design was approved, and the art component came back to us months later. Yeah, yeah.
So I will focus my comments mainly on the landscape because the building's been pretty much commented on. But there's not a lot. The landscape design, as I started to mention, is pretty just a placeholder. So I can't say much other than I think the parking lot in the back is a very stark view for the people that you're looking at. If there's a way you can find a place to put a tree there or somehow soften it would be great. I know it's tight in the parking, but there might be a spot you can bulb out a little spot for a tree. Look at that. Also driving in, you just show a series of little plants, but you could do you don't have a lot of thickness there, but you could do a green wall or trellis with a little structure that separates the residential walkway from the driveway. So it's more architectural, but it's green. Also bringing that to the roof trellis, look, being 2 bedrooms in each unit, I'm pretty sure you are going to get a lot of kids, especially in Albany with the school system. So you might, having the flexibility of that roof space to be redesigned basically on what your tenants need would be a good idea. And safely enough where kids could be up there on their own. They're not going to jump over the fence and fall off the building and all. But I think so I don't want to lock you in on design that doesn't meet what the tenants need, but I think one thing that none of them would want is just a big open space with nothing. You walk up there and it just melts away with no feeling. So maybe you could build a corner, it could be a structural trellis that has some plants on it that you can kind of anchor the space. Oh, you go over the height, do you?
So we were hesitant to do, that's why we did the umbrella.
Okay, well, that's a good comment. Anything you can do there. Those small pots you have, they just run out of water really quickly. So if someone's not watering them every day, they're going to be dead plants in a week. So you need bigger planters in order to cut down on the need to water them every day, right? So things like that can be considered. And if people are going to be cooking in a way that they can clean up so it's not messy and the next person, all of a sudden no one uses it. So those sorts of things you look at. But I know you're really early and you haven't really pushed that. You're still working on the geometry of the building and space. Some things to think about. Also adding some kind of, it's a very urban space. There's no, you're not bringing wildlife in there at all. You don't have a lot of room for it, but that's why I think a tree in the back could do wonders. All of a sudden you have birds, you have things coming and going because you're cutting out your tree in the front. Other than that, I agree. It's a really nice project and it's a great location for it. I mean, if you're going to reduce the parking, this is the place to do it. And I also agree with Megan. We worked on several projects that are 100 units and more that required a parking unit for every unit, and half of them are empty. We had to take out the play space to put more parking in because there was, the requirements required all that parking. Now kids just play in the parking lot. So, they still get their play space, but it's striped for parking. That's the difference. So with that, any more comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, look forward to seeing you again.
So moving on in the agenda, we have our last item is where are we?
Yeah, right.
New business. Item number 7-1, proposed zoning code amendment to sections 20.24.020, site regulations by district residential. And this is the one that we've commented.
Yeah, so this was an action that was taken by the commission in November to amend language as it relates to the horizontal and vertical extensions of non-conforming residential walls. In the process of that meeting, we did some wordsmithing, and for clarity purposes, the commission requested that this come back to make sure that both the intent is properly reflected and that the language is clear, both to the commission and, of course, any member who may elect to, apply for a conditional use permit to extend either the non-conforming wall horizontally or vertically.
And if we agree tonight that this, is consistent with the action that the commission already took, then
Yeah.
it will.
It will move on to the city council. And for your review this evening, there is no formal action that's required. It's really just to make sure that this meets the intent of your action that you took in November.
So, I mean, I've read this, this aligns with my sort of recollection and the intent. It's the tiniest of edits, but I think you're missing an A. So in subsection B, the horizontal extension of nonconforming walls, it says existing nonconforming horizontal walls which encroach into the required front yard or side yard setback areas may be extended in a
A horizontal plane, yes.
horizontal plane.
Okay.
So, not to be
No, This is what, and actually,
super editor here.
there's an extra parenthesis in here, which I've already taken the liberty of Xing out.
All right. Well, I'm the one who I think was confused about this, had trouble reading this separately when Christopher sent me the final version of what we'd approved, have trouble understanding it, and I'm kind of still that way. So the first thing, I guess the biggest change I'm worried about is, I think I understand A and B now. We have the vertical extension of nonconforming walls, the horizontal extension of nonconforming walls. I think the word horizontal in the first line there bothers me. Existing nonconforming horizontal walls, they think should be walls. The word horizontal should come out. Existing nonconforming walls which encroach into the required front or side yard setbacks may be extended in the horizontal plane. That's what the topic of this paragraph. The word horizontal doesn't make sense to me. A wall is a wall.
I think
I would
that's a fair
agree.
point.
Yeah, a wall is a wall. Okay, and then now then what? Now here. So the other part, the other red line sentence, I guess is look at the red line and strikeout portion here. Do we need to have that sentence, extension of the existing non-conforming front walls shall not further encroach in any required setback areas? Or is that redundant? I mean, does that need to be in there? And if it is in there, what does it add?
I read that to mean that if it's non-conforming with respect to the front setback, that the extension of that wall will not create an encroachment in a side setback.
That's, okay, yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that's the intent there.
And it kind of tracks with what was in the prior, or I guess still the existing ordinance. So if you look at the strike through in A, and, maybe it was worded a little more clearly before, but it's, it says, nor shall any extension create a new encroachment in another direction.
That's what we want to avoid, yeah.
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 Oh, and I guess that language is already here, so let's see.
We need,
So the distinction, as I'm reading it, is between the first couple of sentences refer
And
to
in A-
front or side, and then the second part of the paragraph refers only to front walls. So maybe we don't need that sentence, because I do think it's already reflected in the very first. So the first sentence sets up, which encroach into the required front yard or side yard setback. And then if you look at the second sentence, such extensions shall not further encroach on any required setback, nor shall any such extension create a new encroachment in another direction.
yeah.
Right? So, I mean, do you recall if that third sentence is supposed to mean something different?
I think it's actually a holdover from the previous language.
I
And
see.
I'm kind of talking through it now. It does make
Yeah.
sense to strike that
I think
sentence.
it's.
Yeah,
I
it
think
does
it's-
seem redundant.
Okay, good, all right. Phew. I'm having trouble with this, okay. Now, the other thing I have written down here is, do we still want to say, now where does it say here? In the old version, B, the first sentence says, extension of existing walls which do not conform to the existing front yard setback is discouraged. Do we still want to say, do we want to say that anywhere here? That has been a policy for as long as I've been around, is that, and we've had we've had projects come in where people could have gone straight up. They had a small front yard and they encroached in their front yard setback. They could have gone straight up, but we've always encouraged them to put their addition toward the rear of the house, or to not. I mean, I think it's still a policy question. For me, it is anyway. Is that if you have a home that is sitting close to the property line and it has a small front yard, is non-conforming, don't we want to discourage a vertical extension of that wall more than we would want to discourage a vertical extension of a side yard wall that is close to the property line? I think we would. I think that if you increase the bulk of the home that's close to the property line, that affects the street view a lot. And I think that that language was in this section. We've stricken that language, but I'm wondering if it shouldn't be there somewhere.
Well, I think by requiring
Or have we changed the policy?
Yeah.
I think by requiring a conditional use, though, we absolutely can still discourage it. I mean, it's a discretionary process. And I think if we make it known that that's a much harder, it's something that just because there's an avenue to seek it doesn't mean it's something we need to routinely approve. If we don't think it's appropriate, it can be disapproved. If we think more routinely, there are instances where the side is justifiable and maybe is a more normal thing for us to approve. I think we can have that discretion. I think the point that I was making before on this is I really have a hard time with absolute carte blanche, never shall you ever be able to ask for this scenarios, because I do think there are enough funky situations in Albany that we may want to be able to, at some point in time, say yes in a certain circumstance. And so I don't want to close the door to that carte blanche. So I guess for me, leaving in the wiggle room of the conditional use with design review still allows us to make it very clear for us to say no if it's just the normal case where there's an alternative way to develop in a better manner.
Yeah, and I would agree with all that. And your point is taken, but I do think there's still the reason you put these hoops in place that people have to jump through is to create a barrier. I guess generally I don't want us to go down the road of totally reopening this whole discussion, especially because this isn't being presented to us as an action item per se. I think the thing about deleting the extra horizontal totally makes sense, and doesn't seem controversial. Deleting the other sentence that seems repetitive also, I think that's fine, but I just.
All right.
And I don't remember specifically, wanting to strike that sentence before either, but I would just prefer to do the minimum damage here.
Yeah, I know, open it to.
Yeah, okay.
But two comments. I think if we do add a verb about discouraging, I think we get into the question of why are we discouraging, which is a really good question to ask, but I don't know if this is the place to do it. It goes back to the guidelines, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's just assumed that this is.
No, Elizabeth is right. There is a conditional use permit here, right here, and that does discourage it. My experience in the past has been that the commission my experience has been is that when you're doing a vertical encroachment on a side yard setback that's too narrow, it's very frequently occurs commonly, and the commission commonly says, okay, go ahead, go up. But it's rare that someone proposes it on the front yard, and it's rare that we don't have an adequate front yard setback. On some streets, it's not that uncommon.
It's easier to
And in those cases, this language, I think, that was here it was language in the zoning code that gave vertical extensions of front yard encroachments a lower priority than vertical extensions of side yard encroachments. So,
Yeah.
and so I think it's okay. I'm glad to see that, my other two suggestions are acceptable, and those are my biggest concerns with this. Was I was struggling with it and trying to think, well, how is someone reading this, 5 years from now, going to interpret this? And I want it to be I want it to be as clear as we can make it. Yeah.
Well, then I'm going to throw this out there at risk of reopening this thing. But I think this whole thing is just way too many words for something really simple. And I want to throw out, taking the first one, A, as extension of non-conforming walls, period. Non-conforming walls which encroach into required setback areas shall be allowed to be extended, subject to design review by Planning and Zoning Commission obtaining use permits. And that's all we're talking about. Why we're separating to, all these different walls, I think is,
Great.
in the end, it's just saying the same thing.
I don't disagree with that, and I also don't want to be a pain about this, but I think we already voted on this as a,
we did.
commission, and we're not, I feel like we've beaten this to death.
Well, I thought a little life, I could kill it some more.
You want to kill it some more? Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't disagree with you, but I think there was extensive discussion about why, why we set it up this way. And I would like to just move on. I think it works. I agree that it could, there's always ways it could be better, but I think it works.
My only one last comment is if we don't do it now, it's going to come up again in a couple of years, and they're going to go through the whole process of 2 or 3 weeks of confusion. But maybe not. Maybe even though there's more words than we want, it's clear enough that it will never have to be for a long, long time.
I think it's a lot clearer than it has been.
The big change here, and it's a big change, is the horizontal extensions of side yard setbacks, and that's a big change here from that project that came to us a few months ago, and I've never approved that in the past, and I've made people jog their rear additions back to conform with the setbacks, and I still believe that that's what we should do, but I've lost the vote on that. And I accept that. I just wanted to. I reread it and everything. I just thought, well, I do have a couple more comments to make, and I think you've agreed with me, so I'm okay with it.
I have one question, just for potential clarity. And that is in the last sentence of B, for the horizontal extension of nonconforming walls, a requirement that use permit and design review findings for a nonconforming front wall should be made separately. I don't know if there's really anything to be gained from making a separate set of findings. So we could also strike that as well.
Well, I guess, but I mean, to Doug's point, maybe it's a. And again, I'm not going to claim that I remember discussing each of these words when we took action on this, but I think, perhaps that gets at this idea that we're further discouraging.
Front wall extensions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
I think we have it, huh?
Have input on that?
Staff is good.
This is pretty straightforward.
Let's close the book quickly.
All right, very good.
So 8, announcements and communications.
Yes. So obviously, at the beginning of the meeting, 3 of our commissioners have been reappointed to the next 2-year term. Commissioner Kent, your appointment is going to be ratified at the next council meeting, and you'll be sworn in prior to the January 23rd hearing. You'll notice that Eric is not with us tonight. He was not reappointed for this next term, and he he informed Chris and I on Friday of his resignation from the commission. So we do have a new commissioner whose appointment will also be ratified on the 22nd. It's Ian McLeod, who is a local, he's a licensed architect. He runs a design build firm, and so he's here tonight. I don't want to put you on the spot.
And after sitting through this meeting, hopefully you still want to join. Yeah, okay.
So we'll have a new face on the commission going forward.
Excellent.
Okay.
So that, I guess, concludes the meeting. Any more comments? Thank you very much.
Okay. Very good.
Oh, gosh, I don't know if it's 300 feet or